There's a book sitting on the desk of almost every CEO, general, and life coach on the planet. It's 13 chapters long. You can read it in an afternoon. It was written roughly 2,500 years ago by a Chinese military strategist whose full name almost nobody uses, and whose biography is mostly a mystery. Sun Tzu, or, more precisely, Sun Wu. Tzu just means master. It's a title, not a name. He lived during what Chinese historians called the Spring and Autumn period, a time when the Zhou dynasty was fracturing and the Chinese landmass had splintered into dozens of competing states. War wasn't just common, it was the organizing principle of political life. Kingdoms rose and fell within a generation. Generals were some of the most powerful people alive, and Sun Wu, according to the records that survive, was one of the best. He's said to have served the state of Wu, in what's now southeastern China, under a king named Helu, a ruler ambitious enough to want his state to dominate, and smart enough to bring in serious military talent to help him do it. Sun Wu was that talent. He helped transform Wu into a regional power. He won battles. He trained armies. Then, like most people from this era, he mostly disappears from the record. What remained was the book, The Art of War. The problem with Sun Tzu is that we don't actually know very much about him. The earliest biography we have comes from Sima Qian, the great Han Dynasty historian, writing around 100 BCE, roughly 4 centuries after Sun Wu supposedly lived. Sima Qian includes a famous anecdote. The king of Wu, before trusting Sun Wu with his armies, tests him by asking him to drill the palace concubines. Sun Wu agrees. He divides them into 2 groups, appoints the king's 2 favorite concubines as commanders, and begins giving orders. The women laugh. He executes the 2 commanders. The remaining women obey without question. The king is horrified but impressed. Sun Wu gets the job. It's a great story. It might even be true. But it's also the kind of story that gets attached to legendary figures to make a point. Here, the point being that Sun Wu was ruthless, methodical, and not easily intimidated. Whether it happened exactly that way is impossible to say. Some historians today question whether Sun Tzu was a single historical person at all. The text that bears his name may be a compilation, ideas gathered from multiple strategists over time, assembled, refined, and eventually attributed to one legendary figure. This was not unusual in ancient China. Confucius, Laozi, the authorship of foundational texts from this era, is often murky. What seems likely is that there was a real Sun Wu, that he was a genuine military figure of considerable skill, and that the text associated with him carries at least some of his thinking. The rest is tradition filling in the gaps. His background, as far as we can tell, was that of a professional soldier in a world where military expertise was both dangerous and valuable. He wasn't a philosopher in the way we usually imagine philosophers, sitting in contemplation, removed from practical affairs. His thinking emerged from the problem of how not to lose. That grounding in real consequence gives the text its particular quality. It doesn't sound like theory. It sounds like advice from someone who had seen what happens when you get it wrong. The Art of War is 13 chapters, each focused on a different dimension of conflict. Planning, terrain, the use of intelligence, the management of morale, the role of deception, the importance of speed. The chapters are short. Some are only a page or 2. The whole text runs to about 6,000 Chinese characters, compact enough to carry in a pocket, dense enough to take a lifetime to fully absorb. The central idea running through all of it is this: the supreme victory is winning without fighting. That sounds paradoxical coming from a military manual. Sun Tzu doesn't dispute that war is sometimes necessary. He takes it as a given that states will compete, that conflict will occur. His argument is about how to approach it. The general who wins through brute force, attrition, and sheer cost has won badly. Even in victory, he's depleted his resources, exhausted his troops, and weakened his position. The general who wins through positioning, deception, and superior information has won efficiently. He arrives already victorious. The battle is almost a formality. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This shapes everything else in the text. Deception isn't a dirty tactic in Sun Tzu's framework. It's the highest form of strategic skill. If you can make the enemy believe you're weak when you're strong, strong when you're weak, present when you're absent, you control their decisions without firing a single arrow. Intelligence matters enormously. Knowing your enemy's character, their morale, their supply lines, their internal tensions, that knowledge is itself a weapon. The famous line most people know is, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles." What's less often quoted is the second half of that thought, that if you know yourself but not your enemy, you'll win one battle and lose another. And if you know neither yourself nor your enemy, you lose every time. The self-knowledge part is just as important as the intelligence about the other side. Sun Tzu is also intensely practical about human nature. He understands that soldiers are not machines. Morale matters. Hunger matters. A cold camp and a general who doesn't share hardship with his troops will lose. He writes about the psychology of desperation. Sometimes you win by putting your own forces in a position where retreat is impossible, because men who cannot run will fight. He's not sentimental about this. He's observant. The text also contains something that sounds almost modern in its framing: flexibility. The good general adapts. He doesn't have a single approach he applies to every situation. He reads the terrain, the weather, the enemy's state of mind, his own army's condition, and responds accordingly. Rigidity is a weakness. Water, Sun Tzu says, has no constant shape. It flows around obstacles. The army that wins is the army that flows. The art of war was studied in China almost continuously from the time it was written. The great strategists of Chinese history, Zhuge Liang, Cao Cao, and later Mao Zedong, all knew it. In Japan, it influenced samurai culture, and then the business culture that followed. It reached Europe in the 18th century through a French Jesuit translation, and was read by Napoleon, among others. By the 20th century, it had been translated into dozens of languages, and was appearing in business school curricula alongside military academies, which is where things get interesting, and a little strange. The modern appetite for Sun Tzu goes well beyond military strategy. The book has been applied to corporate competition, to sports coaching, to negotiation, to dating, to traffic management. There are editions with titles like The Art of War for Managers and Sun Tzu for Women. People quote it in motivational posters. It shows up in films and rap lyrics. It has become a kind of cultural shorthand for strategic thinking, and like most cultural shorthands, the version people are quoting has often drifted considerably from the original. The irony is that Sun Tzu's own principle, know your enemy, is precisely what most casual readers of the text don't apply to the text itself. They take lines out of context, apply them to situations that have nothing to do with their original meaning, and feel strategically enlightened. All warfare is based on deception, becomes a personal life motto. The specificity of the military context, supply lines, terrain, the management of actual armies in actual combat, disappears, and what's left is a kind of fortune cookie wisdom. That's not entirely the reader's fault. The text's aphoristic quality invites loose application. When something is expressed that concisely, the mind naturally wants to generalize it. There's also a subtler problem. The art of war is often read as a guide to winning. Its deeper argument is about the cost of conflict. about why skilled leaders avoid it whenever possible, why wars of attrition are symptoms of poor strategy rather than displays of strength. A reader who takes the text as a manual for aggressive competition has missed the most important thing in it. Sun Tzu was not advocating for ruthless dominance. He was making the case for intelligence over force, patience over aggression, efficiency over spectacle. The general he admires most isn't the one who wins the most dramatic battles. It's the one whose victories seem almost inevitable in retrospect, because they were prepared so carefully that nothing else was likely. The art of war is now over 2 millennia old, and it hasn't stopped being read. That alone is worth sitting with. Most things written 2,500 years ago are of interest primarily to historians. Sun Tzu gets assigned to military officers in the 21st century. That's a remarkable shelf life for any piece of thinking. Part of why it endures is that it's not really about weapons. It's about conflict as a human phenomenon. The dynamics of competition, the role of information, the management of uncertainty, the relationship between preparation and outcome. Those dynamics don't change much. The technologies change. The fundamental human problems don't. The text also endures because it takes an uncomfortable position seriously, that the most costly victories are often the most dangerous ones. A nation, a company, a person who wins through sheer force and exhaustion has won in a way that sets up the next loss. Sun Tzu insists on thinking about the long game, about what winning costs and whether the cost is worth it. That's harder than just grinding through to victory, and it's a question most competitive frameworks don't ask. What the book asks of us today is something quite specific. To look at the situations where we're expending enormous energy and ask whether we're actually solving the right problem, or just fighting harder at the wrong level. To value intelligence and preparation over reactivity. To understand that the point isn't to demonstrate strength, it's to achieve the outcome. In a culture that rewards aggression, visible effort, and dominance, that's still a genuinely countercultural idea. The victorious warrior wins first, and then goes to war, while the defeated warrior goes to war first and then seeks to win. That's the whole argument in one sentence. Preparation is not support for the real work. Preparation is the real work. Everything else is consequence.